Joakim Wrethed, you wrote your doctoral thesis about the Irish author John Banville and his trilogy of books based on the lives of some of history's most famous scientists, Nicolaus Copernicus, Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton. Can you explain why you find this work so interesting?
Yes, I think there are mainly two things that I'd like to bring to this discussion. I think that the first thing would be what Banville himself was interested in, and we can take Copernicus as the first example. And I think it is the affinities between the creative artist on the one hand and the scientist on the other. If we take Copernicus as the example, in the novel he gets his idea sort of out of the air, or from the gods, if you wish. But then he tries to make his science fit the idea. And that turns out to be a very difficult process, and it's even impossible because he's still counting on circular planetary motions, and they are not circular. So that's why he gets lost on the way, and he can't really get his science to fit the idea. And I think that Banville saw affinities between this process and the creative process of the artist. You know, you can get an idea for a novel project, but then you have to write the novel as well. And I think the creative imagination is the common denominator there, I think.
What do you think we can learn by studying how science and scientists are portrayed in fiction? Can they tell us something about science, for instance?
Yes, I think so. We can see throughout literary history how science pushes fiction and fiction pushes science. So there's a reciprocal kind of process going on. And I think what we also can see is for every utopian narrative that you get about, a dozens of dystopian narratives. So it seems as if we as human beings, we are almost obsessed with trying out the worst case scenario for any kind of innovation. And why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe that's a question we could discuss.
I do have to follow up with this. Is it correct that Johannes Kepler actually wrote a novel published after his death?
Yes.
Possibly the first science fiction novel. What was this about?
Yes, it's arguably the first science fiction narrative that's been written. It's called Somnium. And it's very interesting for one reason especially, that in his science, he wrote a book called Astronomia Novum. And in his science, he was onto the idea of gravity, but he couldn't quite pinpoint it in his science. But then when he wrote his imaginative fiction, which is called Somnium, which is about a trip to the moon, and he sees astronomy from the perspective of the moon, then he took gravity for granted. So something he couldn't really pinpoint within his science, he could write about in his fiction. So this means that Kepler the scientist inspired Kepler the writer. So that's quite interesting, I think.
That's exciting.